Um, but it's already announced being recorded because of the AI. And I
Hmm.
know one of the AIs is Craig's, and that may have been something that's automated. He may not have been turning it on from Ireland, but well, welcome. And so we'll get started. We're going to be going through the outline. Any questions? Any need for resources or questions about where to start? If you aren't here but watching this or listening to it later, if you have questions about first folder, beginning that work, I want to be available, so reach out by phone um, or email, and we can talk. Um, I'm gonna come back to it, but just want to have it up front in case people are watching, but don't go all the way to the end. At our next session, a week from today at 11 o'clock, will be in person, and it will be at Craig's church. It's hosting it um, at 11, um, Parkway United Church of Christ. So I'll get the details out for that. And I'll be sending out an email so that you can let me know your preferences on food, and we'll be ready to have our final in-person session a week from today. So I'm looking forward to that. Um, what we're going to do is take one of the case studies that we had and use it as we learn the rest of the process, and then as we um, reflect back and talk about like how to get started and the kinds of conversations and decisions to make. Um, and so we're going to use Eric and Monique Sanderson, and Tarsha's going to read that case study. And so we're going to listen to the case study and imagine their questions, their challenges. Um, I like the fact that there's a lot of things unknown about the rest of the situation. And so that helps us to be creative and imagine things. But Tarsha's going to share that, and then we'll get started covering the content.
All right. So this case study is entitled Stretched in the Sandwich Generation. Eric and Monique Sanderson are a married couple in their early 50s, navigating the unique pressures of the sandwich generation. They are raising their 16-year-old son, Isaiah, while simultaneously caring for Monique's 82-year-old mother, who recently moved into their home after a fall and subsequent hip surgery. Eric is a small business owner trying to recover from financial losses sustained during the pandemic, while Monique works full time as a nonprofit administrator and serves as a lay leader at their church. Their days are filled with medical appointments for Monique's mother, college prep, and emotional support for Isaiah, and trying to maintain their marriage amid chronic fatigue and limited alone time. Financially, they are squeezed between tuition savings, caregiving costs, and their own delayed retirement planning. Emotionally, both feel pulled in multiple directions with little space for self care or rest. They've grown distant from their faith community due to time constraints, though they still pray privately and long for spiritual renewal. Okay. Can't hear you, George. You're muted.
Yeah, I think that applies to many people that we know,
Yeah.
and I certainly remember being in that almost precise situation. Because we did 13 years with one of our parents at the end of life in our house, and right in that stretch. So sounds very familiar. So in planning, I think it's important to see that what was mapped out in the book and what's in the process of life compass living is to really pay attention to a healthy progression. And I have three progressions that I want us to consider. And the first is inside out. So you can imagine that, um, like I was, Eric and Monique might start by thinking, well, mom who's in crisis is the first priority. the first thing to do. And then Isaiah's next, and then they're last. And I would propose that the health of life, the longevity of life, the capacity to flourish, even as a family, must insist that there be an effort to the degree the crisis allows to work from the inside out so that Monique and Eric, each as individual disciples, individual souls, own their own self care and make choices together. But even before they make them together, to be really honest about their own situations, their own limits, their own feelings, their own desires. Because I could imagine Monique as a full-time worker with a nonprofit and Eric struggling to get his business back to where it was. Um, Feeling like, well, we'll do both of those jobs after everything else is done. And so, inside out is very important. I'm not saying that you don't learn and respond to the information and situations from the outside in. In other words, you're taking in information from your church family, your community, your mother, your son, your spouse, obviously. Um, but dignity of choice would mean that each person is allowed to plan from the inside out for themselves. Um, Secondly, it's from surviving to thriving or from basic needs to flourishing. If you can establish what you have to have as a family, whatever you have to have, your basic needs or your survival resources, then you can get beyond that. And I've seen folks like their mom that you try to give her everything she could want before you start paying attention to your own needs and the future needs you have. And so, um, if basic needs are met, my proposal is that's when you have to meet basic needs. In other words, mom has to have a place to recover and have what she needs. But when you get that done, instead of bringing all of her dreams to fruition, you really focus on what you need day in and day out that sustains the ability of Isaiah to have the support they need, your jobs to have the support they need, and your own self care so that your own health is not compromised. Um, and so you want to make sure you have survival mode covered, um, but that you're always together working towards more than just surviving together, that you're actually helping everyone flourish, everyone thrive. And then current needs to future needs. Once you have your basic needs met today, you start thinking about tomorrow. In fact, my definition of of the care manager in a family is the person who will not go to sleep until the plan for tomorrow is made. If you're the care manager for your parent or whoever, the way you know that is that everybody else knows their part, whether they have anything to do tomorrow or not, but they don't know the whole plan's ready. Who is the care manager? Who knows that Isaiah's plan for the next day is fully ready? I know when I'm going to go to work and come back. I know what mom needs, everything. Who is that? And if you don't do inside out, Eric and Monique could end up on different pages, which means it jeopardizes their relationship. It steals their relationship because they're not paying attention to these progressions. So, my proposal is that these progressions helped me as I came to articulate them, but I paid a big price for realizing that I needed to pay attention to these progressions. Because if I didn't, there's a price to be paid. Any thoughts or questions about the progressions that you have?
I think it's easier said than done in the
Absolutely.
moment.
Yeah, and that's why the winning the game as a team means that 99% of your time is spent at practice and very little time in the game. And what we do as families, my observation, including my own, is that we spend all of our time on the field. And lamenting how we couldn't perform in daily life, and we don't spend enough time actually planning and rearranging how we do it. And so we're trapped in our normal, and that and that and, one thing I'd say, Barb, is that I don't want to do any disrespect. I don't want to fail to honor every effort we make to survive, every effort we make to love. Because when I was going through the 13 years and, emptying my retirement account and exhausted, I think you would have to honor what I did, even though I wish I had planned better, and done differently and had known what that's why I'm doing this, is I wish I had known to slow down and think and do different. But anyway, that's right.
Yeah.
It's absolutely harder to be done than it is to say it. And then the conversations, we covered it in people, but I wanted to return to it and say that it's important that you know you have done what I call discover. So we must know someone to love them well, and we must be known to fully participate. And what can happen in these situations is that you don't fully know the person you're caring for. You're just meeting needs as you think you would want them met, and you're actually frustrating their experience of life by trying to help them in ways that they don't want to be helped. And if you're not known, then like my dad, when my dad realized what it had cost us to take care of everybody, and he was the last one surviving, he had guilt about all that it had cost us because I wasn't showing up. I wasn't saying, Dad, I'm taking another 10,000 out of my retirement account. He never knew I took any out. And so if I had been known, my dad would have insisted on different, he would have allowed different people to help that he what didn't want to have help, and he would have done things differently. We might have transitioned a few ways quicker. And so discover, you have to really, it takes time to sit and discover one another. And then determine is that we must choose to enter a covenant and then choose to do what is ours to do in the covenant. So then how do we want to be related? And like I could think with Eric and Monique, do they feel responsible for mom? Are there other siblings? Are there other options? Are there close friends, other relatives? Who's in covenant with mom? Who's committed to mom? And it's good to know everyone who's committed in covenant with mom so that everyone can have roles and responsibilities, which is the next step. Then you define roles and responsibilities based on who's committed to each other, actually committed, not presumptuous, since we're related, we have to, but you actually talk about it. Then you can define it. So we will need to know one another and negotiate roles and responsibilities in order to fulfill covenants of love and justice. And the reason I put justice in family life is that there's a lot of injustice in family. And you could say it was unjust for Tammy and I to pay our, too much of the bills compared to the other families involved in the 13 years. But there was never an opportunity to do it different because we didn't talk about it. And then delegate, which would mean you actually assign and follow through on it. And some people actually get stuck there. There's a whole school of thought called motivational interviewing. And motivational interviewing is built on the idea that there are so many people that know to do better than they do. And there's a whole progression of how you are actually able to follow through. You know, Initially it was built with recovery in mind. So when do you actually become sober? There's a continuum on how you actually get to a place where you become sober. But in every kind of decision is the application that I found when I studied that stuff writing the book was that you actually have to celebrate every progression towards the ability to talk, decide, and then follow through. And you have the old story of the two frogs sitting on the log, and one decided to jump in the water. How many frogs are on the log? Two, because all he did was decide to jump in the water. He hadn't jumped yet. And so, that's what a delegate is. Delegate is okay, you actually get it done. Um, but anyway, I just wanted to refresh us on that because easier said than done is precisely, do you have the conversations, decide, and follow through? Or do the same people who are hyper responsible stay hyper responsible? And in charge in one sense, and the other thing, sacrificing in another sense. Any questions about that? That's just in the planning, just like in basic ways, this is how the planning flows. All right. Tarsha's going to guide us through power.
All right, so we're going to talk about power, and we know power, especially dynamics within relationships, they can be very dynamic and very interesting and very complicated. Um, and I think it's important to note that power can be a good thing, and power can also be a not so good thing, especially when power is perhaps abused or um, people misappropriate their power and use it for evil and not for good. And so you see noted here, it says when we miss what is possible in all of our relationships, we make the potential of our lives impossible. And I think that's a George quote, I'd say, and I think it's important to just remember within the dynamics of relationships, to be able to be aware of who's holding the power, who doesn't have power in those relationships, in the stories of life, because oftentimes where there's power, people's wills are at play, if you will, right? And so the dynamics can be very fluid and they can be ever changing. So I think it's again important to just acknowledge power for what it is, to see it, to identify who's holding the power, to identify who might not have power, and then discern what's possible with the power that those individuals where you've become aware of, even if it's yourself, discern what's possible with the power that they have or that you may have. And then I also just wanted to highlight as well, power drains, right? Um, if you are the person who has the power to make decisions in your family or perhaps to cut checks, there will be people who might try to take advantage of that, right? And so that might be draining to you, being the sole person making all of the decisions, cutting checks, right? That can be draining, having to carry that power. And I think it's important to monitor the flow of power, whether it's good for good or for evil, and be aware of self, right? And be aware of how in which we're showing up in these power dynamic situations. I think that is crucial, especially when it comes to making very difficult decisions and you don't have things in place and you're trying to execute plans based on what you would deem would be best. That can be very conflicting. And so I think if we're just able to be aware of our power or where the power is flowing from, discern what is possible with that power, and if at all possible, steer that power for good and not for evil, and not allow others to drain our powers. I think the dynamics of the relationships will sail a bit smoother if we're aware of those. Okay. And let's see, anything else I needed to add there, George?
Well, I think the one thing at the top of that next page is the future selves.
Yeah.
That, yeah, don't miss that you're actually spending your future. Something that isn't left available, whether it's energy and time and everything for your future self. Um, it- that's what I neglected so completely. Was I assumed I would stay employed and make money, so taking money from here or there or neglecting relationships here and there, I just work on that later. And my
You
future
know,
self wasn't involved.
something that you and I talked about, and I don't want to stay here because I want to be mindful of time, but I think it's a great example. We talked about the super cape syndrome, And that's a way sometimes people exert their power in these situations, if you will, when they're caregiving or someone's ill and they have to be the person to step up to make
Hmm.
decisions or to rescue. And to your point, oftentimes when that is the case, not individuals aren't considerate of their future selves. So if I go into my retirement and take out this money to, help you with chemo, or if I take off of my job that I just started and start taking you to your chemo appointments, what am I risking for my future self
Hmm.
because I'm trying to put on the super cape and be, the savior of the situation. So being mindful of the power flow. Yeah, you have the power, but are you thinking about your future self and the implications of your decisions today that will impact you for tomorrow?
Yeah. Yeah. And I was thinking that even like well, this, I'll think of another situation rather than my own, but I was working with a family and the mother was wanting to stay in her home and not make transitions that would have reduced the cost of her care and everything. But she wasn't thinking about her own future self because eventually she ended up on Medicaid and in a nursing home she would not have chosen. And the reason she ended up in the nursing home that she would not have chosen sooner, herself in there sooner, was because she wouldn't make a transition earlier based on how it would end up. She just kept saying, the Lord will work it out. Well, the Lord did work it out. It the Lord did give her a place to land. It's just it would have been a different place if they had planned differently. And so that future self's important. And remember, resources that as I define a resource, is anyone or anything that meets a current or a future need. Anyone or anything that meets a current or future need. So let's just go through the power, which is our resources, real quick. Time. And so time is something that meets current and future needs. I have a need to talk to my wife. I have to spend time to talk to my wife. Whatever I'm doing in time is actually a resource and it is a limited resource. And when it's gone, it is gone. And we don't know how much of it we have. And so one of the reasons I started with it is think about how you want to spend your time. And one of the gifts of our mortality, when we're able to know that we're mortal and think about life going to and beyond death, is that it could help us be better stewards of our time. And so one is soul work. Are you going to protect the time for your devotional life? Are you going to protect the time for your prayer life so that your yes can be yes and your no can be no? You must protect that time. That is a resource that you need as a living soul, as a disciple of Christ, is to protect that soul work time. And then work. Eric and Monique, one of the things they're trying to do is work enough so that everyone doesn't go without what they need. And that's roles and responsibilities in your family of choice because I do it, I think inside out. So even though you may go to work for a bigger purpose and you may do more than just meet your family needs and your work income, I'm just proposing here that what you start out with is how does your work and your income relate to your family of choice, the closest people. And and then who are your people? Your village, your tribe, your family of choice, and what time does it take to build that the way you want it to be built? Do you have family meals? It takes time to have a family meal. Um, do you go to graduations? It takes time to show up for a graduation. How do you want to be present with each other as a family of choice? And do you want to plan your life based on five people's schedule who you prioritize, or are there 20 people that you consider family? Who do you want to coordinate your time with? I, uh, I think there's a lot of ways. And then life quakes or crisis is like if there's a life quake, how do you want to show up? If you want to be able to show up in a life quake, it's better to plan how to do that. Or the life quake can really take over everyone's life. If there's something unforeseen and way beyond your capacities, how do you want to do that? Who's agreed to show up for them? And then future security for the whole family. Um, um, who is family and how are you securing your futures together? So what if someone decides to go into a profession where they make little money? Does anybody think, oh, that means that we'll all be responsible for you when you get old financially? Do I think most families just don't think about it. They just let people choose their professions, and the people choose their professions. But, I think of all when a larger church would ask me to talk to them, and I would just be happy where I was and stay. Like, I'm not looking back and regretting that I stayed. I'm just looking back and regretting that I stayed. Like, yeah, it's both. Like, if I had made more money, it'd have been different. But I don't want to serve money. But then my financial future is tied to everyone else's financial future, and their financial future is tied to mine, unless I'm willing to let them go through a life quake without me. And if someone can have a crisis without you helping, they're not in your family of choice as I define it. If their crisis is not yours, and if your crisis is not theirs, it's not family of choice as I define family of choice. Because there's lots of people who are core relationship to me that are precious, and I show up, and I might, if they're in a crisis, show up to visit or help out in some way. But if they're on the ground, somebody else has to show up and stay there till they don't need help. Um, and so, and it turns out that that takes time to plan how to do it, how to show up, and it takes time to show up. And then purpose, ministry, calling. And Tarsha and I, when we talked through this, we were saying how this can mingle with work when you're bivocational or when your work is ministry. That's messy. Um, yeah. I mean, I always knew someone in crisis because of my ministry. Always. I don't remember a day where there wasn't somebody I genuinely cared about in a crisis. And so your purpose or calling can expand the people you want to respond to. Um, and then jobs, hobbies, and entertainment. Notice how it's at the end of the list. When do I do my therapeutic playing of music? When do I do my therapeutic walks in the forest? When do we do that? Well, I'm proposing that we be stewards of the power we have, and the main power we have is in and distributed by our time. You have to actually dedicate time to form a budget, have conversations, do all that. The second is finances, and I propose a progression that I think honors inside out, the progression of inside out and current to future and basic to flourishing. I think this is a way to approach finances that does the progression that I'm suggesting. So you have a budget, I call it a reality check. The first thing you need to do is have your actual budget, how you actually spend money and the income you actually can count on, and balance that. You start with a balanced budget that meets your absolute obligations. Then you have savings. So you're inside out. Now you have savings, but it's moving into the future. In other words, now, we're saving for the annual or the twice a year car insurance or the annual termite protection or whatever. So you've got that. And it also maintains an emergency fund. So at some level, something outside your budget can happen and you have money for it. Um, and I know my wife and I years ago started Ron Blue and then some other person and then Dave Ramsey, but they all talked about an emergency fund. And our first emergency fund was trying to have $1,000 that we left alone. And we never, for a long time, I should say never, it seemed like forever that we could accumulate 1,000 without using it. Because we would have some desire we had that would take away any part of the $1,000 that was there without that's not committed to something that happens every month. But you begin to have savings, and then you have a budget with secure futures and um, uh, generosity and legacy. And so then you actually have the ability to think, well, we're going to save for college and the life stages. So our children are going to go through three stages of childhood before they're adults. Do we actually have what we need to support them financially through all three stages? And my parents are going to go through mutual care and dependent care. Do they and we have what they need to go through those stages? And again, if they're in your family of choice and they have financial needs, you're going to at least think about using your financial resources to meet their needs in those future stages of life. And so it's good to think about secure futures for everybody in your family of choice and what would that look like. And I'm going to say something that you may want to argue with, and that's fine because plenty of people have argued with me, including my wife, about what I'm about to say. But I believe that if I'm committed, now to speak for myself, if I'm committed to meet your needs in the future, if you have a crisis, I have the right not to demand an answer, but I have the right to ask what your plans are. And I have the right to ask, would you, in your imagination, imagine that I'm among the people that show up and help you?
Agreed. That's fair.
I at least can ask. I do not have to have an answer, and it doesn't have to be the answer I like. And that means that if the answer is, here's my plan, and you can see, I see that it's inadequate in my view. And if they do count on me to show up, then I have to decide how to stay involved. And if I stay involved, because I would have the right to say, do not count on me unless there's a plan. If we're not going to have a plan, I'm going to do my best not to let you bankrupt the rest of us. I just, I, my gut is tight right now. I mean, right now I'm tied up in a knot because that I was not able to do that for 13 years and I'm here. So, so that's part of why I insist that I'm giving myself the right to have the conversations and ask the questions. And I don't because I do trust that the Lord will get us through whatever hard things we end up in. I do want to have the maturity to not need them to give me my answer that I want and still stay committed to them, as I can stay committed. That's why I say you're not required to rescue someone from a life they created without you, but you can rescue someone from a life they created without your involvement. And I would also say, in the name of covenants and agreements and integrity, that if someone has a crisis in a life you created with them, like my wife and I, then I am, in my sense, morally obligated to stay with them when it gets bad, even if it costs me. So there are people I'm in covenant with, and in my tradition, even if it costs me everything and I end up on a cross keeping the commitments I've made, I'm willing to do that when I'm spiritually able. I'm not saying I always do it, but that's the nature of commitments, agreements, covenants, as I understand it. And then wealth building is that you've secured, reasonably secured the future of your family of choice. You've got agreements that you can, and some are possible, some aren't. And then you're just building wealth, and that wealth is actually going to be accessible to people beyond your death. What will that be? And who will get it? And some people are able, individually as households and as families of choice, build wealth. And that makes another level of generosity and legacy possible financially. Um, and I think it's good to aspire to wealth building. Um, but I would propose you're more secure by knowing how your relationships will show up than you are by having enough money. But you have to have enough money. So, anyway, that's my thought on finances. Agreements, this is to the covenants, your family of choice and your core relationships. Again, inside out, honoring surviving to thriving and honoring current to future, make agreements, you know, make sure your agreements, your covenants with your family of choice are primary. And then the others, what do you have with what power, what resources are there for in your church family? Not only their their lives, their resources, but the resources they know about, the resources they can help you find and connect to. In your community, the publicly funded and provided resources, the paid services available and affordable. Um, the illustration I used with Tarsha, I use again, is that um, the when my dad needed care, I could pay home instead $23 an hour to send someone to take care of my dad, or I could pay someone directly $17 an hour, and the $17 an hour person was happier than the $23 an hour because the $23 an hour person was actually getting paid $9 an hour. And when I hired them directly, they were getting paid 17 and and they were happier and I saved $5 and they made $5 more. And that's how I set my $17. I said, "What if you made $5 more and I saved $5? How about if I hire you directly and you make five more and I get, you know." So who helps you become aware of ways you can pay for services for less money? And in your family of choice, what if you found out that somebody in your family would be willing to, live in your extra bedroom, move out of their apartment, they save 1,200 a month, they take care of somebody while they're dying, and then they move back into an apartment, and in the middle, put $17,000 in their college fund. You know, I'm just proposing you get creative about agreements and with each other at every circle of connection, as I call them, moving out. Um, so that's actually the end of the content. Um, so the system is really person, people, place, planning, protection, and um, power. And so if you think about the toolbox that we're giving or putting on the table, it would be make sure of your compass, person, people, place, and when you are in love with someone, committed to someone, some group of people, that you honor each person's person, people, place, and that you negotiate how you set direction, how you let your life compasses come together to form a compass you share so that you're moving towards the life you want to build together. And then you do that in the planning using the three progressions. And you do that by first protecting everyone who's an adult to protect their dignity when they cannot make choices themselves. And my proposal is that protection is very important, and the first folder is important because it identifies people who are in your family of choice. If they are your power of attorney and you're, um, uh, why am I going blank on the person that does the will? Anyway, what is
Executor.
executor? Thank you. If they're your executor, they're your durable power of attorney. They are in your family of choice by definition, unless there's someone you're paying to do those roles. Um, and then power is do all of that with a full openness to everyone's resources getting on the tape. All the resources each person has and what you collect together. And that's why I propose that if churches really got serious about this, they could actually be amazing, amazing resource families for each other. Have all kinds of relationships in terms of how close they are and how much time they spend together. But you could have this really secure network and you could have a multi-generational village that is called a church. But you'd have to do it intentionally. And that's the dream I have is that we'll build some models of that. So the case study. Um, Barb, you've got 15 minutes, and I think we can be done in 15 minutes if we want to be.
Okay.
Uh, let's imagine um, And Eric, Monique, Isaiah, mom, their work and church, because they're involved in church. And it said Monique's a leader, volunteer leader. Okay, so let's just go through it. Support of the household. I put flourishing in the rhythms of life there. What are some things they need to make sure they protect that they do not abandon? Do not abandon in order to be Eric, Monique, and Isaiah having a good life as a household. Because mom's a guest right now, so she's not the household. She's a guest. Um, just tell me some things they need to protect.
I mean, if it were me, I'd want to protect time with the spouse and the, my own child.
Right.
Yep.
I mean, I
But
don't think everybody will want to protect the same things.
exactly. No, yeah. One thing keep in mind that I have learned over and over, had it in mind when I began, but I'm more committed to it than ever, is that there is no model in Life Compass Living that is um, usable for anyone else. There are lessons in every Life Compass Living um, group that will teach you in yours, but we're just imagining, and I think that would be different. Um, how about Isaiah's college savings as a household, or professional training? Because I think there's plenty of very good professions that don't require college. But in the rhythms of life, which mean you're going to do these rhythms through the stages of life that are ahead. So, the household, what are you going to protect? And you can decide to protect them and then find out you can't. But my proposal is you will probably not protect them to the degree you could if you don't first decide to protect them. Are you going to protect the budget that saves for Isaiah's future? Are you going to protect, money um, to go to the family reunion or whatever? My wife and I are trying to get to a family reunion, and it's not in our budget, and looks like we're just going to say no. You know, I don't even like that we're that tight, but that's the reality. So, and then building a family of choice in the transient life, full support of flourishing. Um, and support of the household. What do you protect in light of the fact that mom's your guest?
Hmm.
Mm. And what are you trying to accomplish with her as your guest? Um, and I had different arrangements with each of the four parents that went through our household, um, because they were just different personalities. And like when my parents moved in with us, uh, the idea was first received by my wife as an absolute no. She said no. And then I said, well, we're not talking about same living space. We're talking about under the same roof. And she said, oh, how would that work? And it ended up working out fine because my mom had her own kitchen and my parents had their own space. Um, and so, but how do you do that? Extended family and roots that work. How do you really think about who your extended family is, how you relate to them? I don't know siblings for Monique and Eric, and how close does the church that she volunteers in, is it the kind of church that shows up and helps out with moms who are recovering at home? I mean, I think that's all the kind of stuff that um, we begin to think about. And the key tools, I would say, for us and for Eric and Monique, are Life Compass conversations. will Eric and Monique really discover with each other what each of their life compasses is. Like Eric, is this a business you're really committed to recovering, or do you need to let go of that business and get a different job? Monique, you have such high gifts. Do you need to keep working in the nonprofit sector, not getting paid as much, or might you go get a job that that earns more? Um, might we pay for mom's care? Maybe mom has money. She's just there because they want to take care of her, but she has money. Oh, might um, Monique take 3 months off, take care of mom, and not pay for the care that mom needs in the house? Um, each of the things becomes a how do we, that's the determine and then define roles and responsibilities and delegate. If you have those conversations, I would propose you empower each person. If you don't have the conversations, you've left them to who's in power. And oftentimes the in these kind of situations, mom would be in power. She would be saying what she thinks she needs and wants, and that's what everybody would do. And that was, a lot of my experience. Let me say that differently. That was a lot of my wife's experience of my dad living with us. Was she felt like there was just oh, dad needs this, we do it. And there was no uh, conversation about deciding. And I was like, oops, oops. I said oops a lot. I wasn't trying to neglect your involvement and spend our money without asking you, but I realized I did. And so, yeah. And then parallel planning, remember that you can let someone have the life they want and love them and see them and relate to them in some way, but you're letting their life go the direction it needs to go while you walk beside them and have your own plan that secures the life and future you want. And then when you need to and choose to, you can move into their life and support them or let them move into your life, but you keep your plan what it needs to be, and then you let others get involved in the way you choose. Parallel planning, I think, is very important. Your priority action list means actually get to the point that you delegate and follow through on the highest essentials, which are, remember, inside, basic needs, survival needs, and current needs. Your priority action is, are all of those met? Then that's your priority action list. Does it need to be on the list that is for the tightest circle of people to meet their basic survival needs in the current life they're living? And that's a priority action list. Does that make sense? That's and then what I call progressive planning list is we would also like to talk and decide and plan for and do these other things over time.
George, I'm gonna head out. I gotta take a break before the noon. I gotta log in right at noon.
Thank you, Barb. And I'm
Yeah.
just gonna, all I'll do now is the summary and then I'll be sending it out.
All right.
Thank you,
Bye now.
Barb. All
Mhm.
right. Bye. So the summary that I wanted to do was to look ahead, homework, the idea between now and our final live session that it would look through everything and identify any questions you have so that the priority when we meet would be the questions and application of all this to your own life and congregation. The second is that review the case studies so that we can use them if we don't have, all of our time taken with your own questions and situations and in your life and congregation, then we can use those case studies to apply what we've been learning so that we know how to learn it. And then thirdly, think about how we might be able to help you and your congregation to utilize this material. It can be done as it was at Tarshish Church, focused on um, life and legacy, life, death, and legacy. We can also come and do classes in particular parts of life planning. whether, the most common are end of life planning, long-term care planning, estate planning. Those are the things people think about. But I've actually got 26 classes that break it down. Like, how do you prepare for the empty nest? Um, how do you give the gift of a good visit? How do you really show up for somebody in light of Life Compass? I think that's different. But anyway, there's 26 classes that there. Another one that's very popular at the senior living community here in Pittsburgh is, I call it, mastering the art of multi-generational living. So how do you master being able to share life with younger and older people that you love, that you want to share life with? So there's a bunch of classes. So think about how we might be able to help you. Anything else, Tarsha, before we wrap up?
That's good. We know that we will gather next Thursday at 11 a.m. at Parkway United Church of Christ in Winston-Salem. And George is going to send a link for those of you who will be joining us, hopefully in person, for your lunch request, and then also be thinking about any other questions you might have and opportunities for George and I to come to your congregation to host. Um, or a portion of the work that we've done together over the last few weeks. So
All
that's all.
right. I'm going to turn off the recording